Okay, good morning, Nick, Marit, and Carmen.
Good morning.
This morning we will discuss one of the basic understandings in body psychotherapy that deals with body and mind and their relationship. And I think the first question we would like to explore is are body and mind two expressions of something that is the same, whatever that something is? That also needs discussion. And of course, it has a relationship with the question whether you think that body and mind are just one, inseparable, or body and mind are something that is not quite one inseparable thing. That's a discussion we had last week, and some of that discussion might come back today as well. So, Nick, may I ask you to say a few words about your stance on the subject to start with?
Okay. Well, until very recently, actually, until I started thinking about this conversation, I would have said something very similar to the idea that body and mind are two different expressions of the same thing. And in fact, I have used that formulation um, in things I've written about it. Um, and it's not that it's not true, but it doesn't seem to be quite enough, because then we're left with the question of what is the one thing. Um, and we don't have any way of answering that except by using ideas like body and mind. Um, so it's not like, people used to think that the evening star and the morning star were two different things, two different stars, the star that arose first at night and the star that stayed longest in the morning. And then they realized that they were both the planet Venus. It's not like that. It's not like there is something like the planet Venus, which we're mistaking for two different things, body and mind. I think it's much more complex. I think body and mind um, are both two and one, and are neither two and one. And I'm sure I'll say more about that as we go along.
Thank you, Nick. Marit, can I ask you to say something about your stance?
Thinking about it, my understanding or formulation is that body and mind are two parts of the same system, and they are interconnected. For me, it's a form of a relationship between two parts of the one. And they're always in relationship, they're interconnected. I think it's not possible to separate them completely, but at times the relationship is conflicted, contradictory. So I agree that there is a form of separation between the two.
Thank you. Carmen.
I think a couple of things. One is that when I think of body and mind, I really never use that phrase, but for the purposes of now, if I think of that, I start to think about what does the and represent. And that's where my interest goes. What is what is it that connects body, mind? Those two words, those two places in ourselves, one of which we can define physically. We can define the body very strongly physically. Much more difficult to define what we mean by mind. And I think this is a struggle that informs my thinking around my recent thinking around this idea. So
with something about what is the nature of the and in body and mind, and what affects that. And for me, there's something about understanding something about context and situation over time. And I haven't got further than that, but that's where my current thinking is. That's what I'm currently chewing on.
Okay, thank you very much. Well, as for myself, I am close to what you say, Morit. I see body and mind as inseparable to start with. And I see them on the same level of complexity of a person. And I would say the person for me would be the thing, so to speak, the whole. And mind and body are on a slightly less complex level R2. But on the complexer level, they are inseparable and well, I wouldn't call it the same, but they have a function in the level of the person. So they both have, yeah, a level that you can't take away, so to speak, for the person to stay a person. Something like that.
Hmm. I'm not sure where we take this now, but I'm listening to words like the inseparable and also the differentiation you were making as well, Morit. And I guess what comes up for me is a sense of focus, about we can focus differentially on ideas of body and mind. But in focusing, I am, of course, using my body and my mind. And I think the whole self is involved in that focusing. So even though I can shine a spotlight on one aspect, and I don't want to say or the other, because I think they're multiple variations. I'm a bit resistant to the dichotomization, is what I should say. But what I'm aware of is I can focus in on one aspect more than on the other. And I think there is a way in which in body psychotherapy, we're working towards holding both in mind, for want of it. The words really fail us, or they fail me, because they don't quite capture the sense of it. But that's kind of where I go at this moment.
Yeah, I agree. The words fail us.
Mm.
Because our language is essentially binary. It does depend on splitting things into two as our first move, and then splitting things further and further and further. And if we're trying to talk about something that may not be splittable into two, it's very, very difficult to maintain that in the way we talk about it.
Mm.
What feels to me important here is to stay as close to experience as we can, rather than an intellectual analysis, because of course intellectual analysis is mind talking, if you like. So it's prejudging the question. And my experience, at any rate, seems to be that I constantly move between experiencing the two as separate and experiencing the two as the same.
Yeah, for me, it depends on which level I'm asking myself the question. On one level, I can say, of course, I can discern my body. I can feel my body, and I can feel myself thinking, for example, which is a mind activity. So in that sense, I can fully go with a person who says, well, body and mind are not the same. True. On the other hand, they are so much interconnected that my mind works differently when I'm aware of, for example, the width of my hips. I think differently than when I only feel the back of my head, for example, or the top of my head. So in that sense, I think they are two parts who function a bit differently, but two parts of one big network where you cannot, take the things apart. And the other way around as well. I mean, my thinking influences, which is also a mind activity, my imagination. We all do that in doing therapy, don't we? We use our imagination. We ask the client to use their imagination to influence what happens in their body. So in that sense, I cannot say they are separable. So yes, they might be different, but they are, for me, totally inseparable.
Perhaps the place where we can experience that most directly, the place where I experience it most directly is when I bring my attention to my breathing, as we constantly do in body psychotherapy, in one way or another. Because breathing is exactly on that interface, isn't it? It's something that happens of its own accord all the time. But as soon as we pay attention to it, as soon as we introduce mind, witnessing to it, it becomes something that we can consciously control. So it takes us through that loop over and over again with every breath. We experience the inseparability and the separability of body and mind.
My experience is that there are different states. There are states in which I feel that body and mind are working in harmony, shall we say, or functioning in harmony. And then it feels like they are one. And there are states in which I feel a conflict between body and mind in terms of impulses, judgments, decision-making. So it's interesting to notice the times in which there is this harmony and functioning as one, and the times that there are conflicts. And still, even when there are conflicts, it does feel like one part influences the other, because essentially they belong to the same system, and the system is interconnected.
Perhaps we could ask ourselves what relationship between body and mind as experiences is body psychotherapy encouraging and supporting? Which is perhaps a way of saying, what do we mean by embodiment?
Yeah.
Yes.
Well, I was with that with two words in my body. I was holding two words. One was your idea of levels, Liddy, and I had this feeling as you talked about levels, or a sensing into that. And when you talked about a system, I noticed that my breath shortened. So if I stay with my experiencing, and I think it's because I think we're multiple systems all the time, and we're systems in a wider field of experiencing. And so if I focus in on the system, that is what I'm talking about, was talking about earlier, is it's possible to focus in on levels and systems, but there is something that happens in the context. And I'm thinking of what I encourage and support in the work, in my work, because that's really where I would have to come from. What I encourage and support is a movement between being able to do that, but then widening out to having a sense of integration in a wider field. So this is why I use the words context and situation so much in my work, because what I'm saying to people is, or my understanding of myself in relation to my client or to the group or to the teaching group, is that I am going through something that is changed as each element touches me in a different way. So there's the felt sensing that leads to thinking, that leads back to felt sensing, that leads to connecting. And it's that whole dynamic that I think makes this so difficult so it's that dynamic, that understanding of that dynamic that I'm actually encouraging and supporting. That's what I want to say.
For me, in the way I work, there is one other important aspect, which I call memory systems, or however you like to call it, but let's call it memory systems. Like that people, when they experience too many difficulties emotionally, for example, or maybe even physically, that they can't keep that memory with them, so to speak. So that is kind of set aside somewhere. And this has aspects of thinking, of mind, of what they see, hear, etc., and all the bodily feelings. So each of these complexes has all these elements, and many people who arrive in my room have difficulties in kind of knowing which time they live, so to speak. So memory systems that have been parked somewhere step in when they are triggered. So in that sense, it's very useful to see that all these signs that belong to one memory system, whether they are physical or imagining or rules or whatever it is, even smells and things, that they belong to this particular system. And that's very useful, because those systems, when they get new information by talking to them, so to speak, in the current times and talking about current times, there can come an exchange between the current person or that level of a person and the old memory systems. So in that sense, for me, it's very useful to not bother about whether something is mind or body. They are all part of that particular memory system.
And I guess for me,
A
Lydia,
similar way of thinking about things. Sorry, Cam, go on.
sorry, go on, Nick.
We
You
both
go.
started at the same time. That's all I was going to say was I use a very similar way of thinking about things, different terminology.
Yeah. Huh.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's right for me also, because when I talk about situation and context, that would be part of the client's situation and context.
Okay.
Is the nature of what you're calling the memory systems. So
Okay.
that influences how I might be in response to, and then how I might respond to.
So we might ask, what about this kind of looking at working in therapy is particularly body psychotherapy? What are we doing that, you know, other modalities who are not body psychotherapy, how they are working? What's the difference?
One thing I think we're doing implicitly and explicitly at different times is supporting people in becoming embodied, which is why I raised that term earlier. And it's a complex term; it has a complex set of meanings. But I think what it primarily means is encouraging people to be constantly aware that they are both a mind and a body, whatever the exact relationship between those two things is.
And how do you help them to come there, so to speak?
There are complex ways of doing that, but the simplest answer is by pointing them back towards their body experience repeatedly.
Yeah.
And what are you feeling in your body when you say that?
Huh.
It's a question that I use quite a lot.
Answering this question, I think that I'm interested in splitting. And I think in body psychotherapy, when we talk about splitting, we talk about splitting from the body, not just splitting in different areas of our mind or in different time capsules, as you said, Lydie. Yeah, so I think the concept of splitting as a defense extends to the body. I think the way I bring the body into the room is also by noticing my body and talking about my body reactions and responses. And in this sense, body psychotherapists, especially those who work in an embodied way, train to be tuned into their own systems, their own body, and to see then the interconnectedness through mirror neurons, etc., to the client system, body and mind.
So what do you do if a client comes in and is mainly identified with her mind or her thinking, and you can see that, you know, she is not very much in touch, and when you ask, can you pay attention to your body, you only get you know, like sort of analytical response
or medical response. Okay, I don't have a fever, I don't have a pain, I'm okay. Yes, well, I think my role is to first of all think about this defensive function of this. Why does it need to be like that? Why is it good for this particular system, this particular history, that this is kind of a neurotic status quo that she achieved? How does it support her existence, first of all, before I challenge it? Yeah. And my way of challenging is to first ask, how does she experience her body? What is her relationship to her body? What does she like or doesn't like about her body? How her body failed her in the past, or whether it supported her in different kind of situation. And then slowly so I enter through the mind, which is where she feels safe and grounded. And I invite relating to the body first from this safe place. And then later on, I will invite relating to the breathing, as you said, Nick, because I think this is a very important bridge, and a bridge that people can relate to without feeling too pushed or too attacked. and the rest will follow from there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, when I ask myself that same question, sometimes I ask people to do very practical things. So like, can you feel the width of your pelvis? Can you put your hands on the sides? Is that the same or not the same width as you felt before? And then can you, for example, let your weight sink down in this pelvic area? And that, to my understanding, helps them, or many of them, to start even talking from, from their body instead of from their heads. And it becomes quickly clear when there is something that is protesting against doing that. And then usually we enter the area of the different memory systems and ask that particular memory system why it's dangerous to go into feeling the body, etc. But I mean, we use different terminology, etc., to more or less do the same, I guess.
Yeah, I was thinking it's that I can hear the similarities, and yeah, different language. I'm staying with your pen portrait of this particular client, and I think if I imagine myself in a room with a client who is presenting, well, they're presenting all sorts of things, but is attached to talking from their thinking only. I have a bracket around the only. What I start listening to is their patterns of thinking, their patterns of expressing, their voice tone, the prosody. And the reason I do that is I don't want to interfere early on I don't want to interfere and challenge early on. I want to enter the world of the client as is to start with. And I find things like prosody, voice tone, and breathing patterns really interesting to just stay with and not particularly do anything. So on one level, I'm responding to their thinking. And at another level, I'm attending to what else am I picking up? What other, I don't know if this is the right use of the word, but the word that comes to my mind is what other aesthetics are, what other aesthetic is there. And I guess I am aiming at something similar, or at least I would say I am inviting something similar over time with the client. So I might say, so when you use that phrase, just notice if I say the phrase back to you. So I really work with the words to start with. And I play with, just notice what happens when you hear the phrase back. And what I'm looking at is how they hold that. And then I might point out subtle changes I see in their face or their body as they hear the phrase again and tell me their response. And I say, were you aware that as you talked about that, you lifted your shoulder? And so I look for something that they might just manage to experience. But of course, I'm saying this quite quickly. This might be over several sessions for me.
Yeah. Might be over several years.
Well, in another way, yes. It's like a building. It's like I kind of keep thinking of the fifth wave. You know, it comes in waves, and then there's the building to the fifth wave, which is the one that really does something. So, yeah, that's my response really to that at the moment.
So
I
is
agree.
there-
It's generally best to meet clients where they are and gradually introduce other things. Although there are exceptions, you know, sometimes, occasionally, with a client, it's best to actually immediately confront them with a completely different way of doing things. And intuition is very much a part of that choice, isn't it? Which is moving towards the side of the body. But I wanted to introduce something we haven't actually mentioned so far, I think, which is that when we talk about body and mind, we're implicitly treating them as a symmetrical pair, a pair on the same level. And that's not actually true, because the mind is surely an emergent property of the body. The body is not an emergent property of the mind. In other words, you can have a body without a mind, but you can't have a mind without a body, not as far as we know anyway, not in our human experience. And yet, because we're talking about all this, we're inevitably coming from the side of the mind, we're inevitably privileging the mind, even when we talk about the body being on a more fundamental level. And this is part of why the whole conversation is so difficult.
So do you propose something different?
Only that we keep reminding ourselves that we are bodies before we are minds.
When we talked last week about is mind a product of the body, we concluded fiercely no. But if I hear you now, Nick, which I don't disagree with, that is a totally different outcome then.
I don't remember that bit of the conversation last time, to be honest, but I wouldn't say product, but it's a property of the body. It's something that emerges out of being a body.
Yeah.
We can watch that with babies, you know.
Yeah, and some people would challenge that. Some people would say, well, there is mind everywhere.
Yes. Yes, they would, and I wouldn't. And I think it's very difficult to imagine being a body psychotherapist and being a Platonic idealist at the same time. I'd be interested to know if there are any body psychotherapists who see bodies as the product of mind rather than the other way around.
A product is maybe too square a word. I mean, emerging property is much more elegant, of course. And last week I couldn't come to find these words when I asked the question. But yeah, if we stay with emerging property, mind is an emerging property of the body, I think I could agree with that.
I probably actually also would go to the other place. Because if I think about my own history with various illnesses and with being on the point of death a couple of times, I know there's something about that experience and the experience of healing that has involved. I keep going back to a really old book called Mind as Slayer, Mind as Healer. But if I stay with those experiences, there is something in how I was with my own felt thinking is the word I want to use, which is a phrase I've started talking about more, that implies an embodied sense of thinking, or thinking that I can connect with what's happening in my body. It's that felt thinking that helped reshape my body into what it needed to be in order to heal. And so that's just informing me a little bit at the moment. And I'm thinking of when I've worked with people, I think where this takes me, this idea of emergence, is the differentiation of emergence, depending on how someone's mind operates, I mean, whether you call it a system or whether you talk about different brain processes. And that too seems to influence how people's bodies are. I'm thinking of working with my students who have ADHD or are neurodiverse, and they have an intense awareness of their own diversity, neurodiversity, and it somehow is influencing how they hold their bodies in the space. So that's where that takes me.
I think everything is there in what you've just been saying, Carmen, but I think we would have to go over it very, very slowly and think about each term as it comes along and be very precise, and probably spend about a year unpacking it. And I think it's all there, but the language needs to be used so carefully if we're going to really make sense of it.
Which brings me to the point, dear colleagues, that, well, I think we need to end this conversation for now. The conversation has not ended. I mean, we are in the midst of it. Does anyone of you want to say something as a conclusion for now, to end the video?
No.
I'm really left with what I was saying and something about, and I agree with you, Nick, there's something about defining our terms. At some point we need to do a lot more on defining our terms, but I'm with the idea of emergence and changing emergence and the relationship to, for want of a better word, to mind and body.
Yeah, so I think that the word mind needs to be defined more. And well, like Michelle Heller always kept repeating, we need to define the body as well. So that's one thing that comes forward from this conversation, I think. And yeah, I'm happy to also hear from our colleagues outside this group. So I hope we will have reactions. Please send us an email or underneath this video on YouTube. Give your comments because we really want to know about how the wider field of body psychotherapy thinks about these issues. Thank you.
Great. Thanks, guys.
Thank you all.